The bridge of the alien warship pulsed with the glow of holographic displays, casting eerie blue light across the sleek metallic walls. The crew moved with precision, their movements sharp, and calculated, their uniforms pristine, the air thick with the scent of ozone and authority. At the center of it all stood Commander Lizara. Her violet eyes narrowed, her ridged brow furrowed as she stared a monstrosity on the screen. Before her, a human ship, if it could even be called that. It was massive, hulking, covered in rust and scars from battles long past, its hull patched together with mismatched plates, its thrusters sputtering like the last breath of a dying beast. She let out a slow hiss of amusement, arms crossed over her armored chest. "What is this?" she asked, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "This is their ship. This is what the humans bring before the might of the Zelari Empire." The bridge crew chuckled, exchanging smirks. The humans were known for their arrogance. But this was outright pathetic. The scans show it is still functional, Commander. But barely said her tactical officer, a tall, slender Zelari with dark green scales. Its energy output is laughable at best. Weapons systems, archaic defenses, crude and inefficient. I would be embarrassed to pilot such a thing. Lizara let her gaze linger on the screen, the image of the rusting human vessel, filling her with disgust and pity. She had encountered humans before, and while they had their moments of resilience, they were nothing compared to the superior might of the Zelari. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Let's see if they have the dignity to explain themselves." The comms officer, a young Zelari with nervous fingers, worked swiftly. The screen flickered, shifting from the image of the human ship to the face of its captain, an older man with streaks of gray in his hair and eyes that did not match the wreck of a ship behind him. His uniform was worn, the fabric frayed at the edges, but his posture was straight, his expression unreadable. "This is Commander Lizara of the Zelari Empire," she said slowly, her tone laced with mockery. "State your purpose, human, because from where I stand you appear to be little more than a drifting pile of junk." Her bridge crew chuckled again, emboldened by her tone. The human captain remained silent for a moment, his gaze steady, unwavering. Then he leaned forward, resting his arms on the rusted console before him, his voice calm, even measured. "I'd advise you to step aside." The laughter in the Zelari bridge died instantly. Lizara's amusement was replaced with irritation. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing at the audacity of this human. Did he truly believe he was in a position to make demands? Perhaps the condition of his ship had driven him mad. "You'd advise me," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words on her tongue. "Fascinating. Tell me, Captain, what exactly do you think is going to happen here? Your ship is an embarrassment. Its outdated weapons won't even dent our hull. Your engines are barely keeping you in place. What do you possibly hope to achieve in this situation?" The human captain didn't flinch. He simply let a small, almost imperceptible smile tug at the corner of his lips. "I think you should watch closely, Commander." A flicker of unease passed through Lizara. Though she quickly buried it, she turned to her crew. "Scan their ship again. I want every detail. There is no way they are this confident without reason at once, Commander." Her tactical officer, their fingers dancing across the controls. New data began to pour in. But before he could analyze it, something happened, something that sent a ripple of dread through every Zelari on the bridge. The human ship moved, not just moved, but surged. Its once flickering thrusters now glowed with an intensity that sent energy spikes through their scanners. The ship itself trembled, as if shedding its old skin, its rusted exterior holding together, not through decay, but through something more, something unseen. The deep growl of its engines began to echo through space, vibrating even through the Zelari ship's reinforced hulls. The lights on the bridge flickered for a split second as the ship's energy readings skyrocketed. "Impossible," the tactical officer whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. Commander Lizara took a step forward, her fingers curling into fists. "What are they doing?" she snapped. "The scans, they're changing. The power output of that ship is increasing exponentially." The human vessel let out a thunderous roar, a sound that should not exist in the vacuum of space. And yet it did, shaking the airways, crackling through their sensors like a storm rolling in from the depths of a black abyss. Lizara's eyes locked onto the screen, her breath caught as the ship that she had mocked as a useless relic came to life like a beast awakening from its slumber. The human captain sat in his warm command chair, fingers tapping idly against the rusted armrest, his expression unreadable as the alien commander's voice crackled through the ancient comms system. Her words, laced with arrogance and amusement, her ship was pristine, a masterpiece of Solari engineering, polished and perfect, just like the creatures that operated it. He had seen their kind before, all of them looking down on humanity, all of them making the same mistake. Across the bridge, his crew waited in silence. They knew the plan they had prepared for this moment. The years of modifications, of sleepless nights, spent reinforcing the ship, its battered exterior, hiding the truth. Beneath it, all the world saw was rust and decay. But they knew better. They knew what lurked beneath the surface. The alien commander's voice came again, sharp, cutting through the silence, her tone mocking as she repeated her question. Did you really just threaten us with that wreck of a ship? Her bridge crew erupted into laughter, the sound grating against the static of the old speakers. The human captain exhaled slowly, fingers still drumming against the metal. He could feel the tension in his crew. But there was no fear, only quiet anticipation. He leaned forward just slightly, his voice calm, unwavering. I'd advise you to step aside. For a moment, the laughter stopped, a brief silence stretched between them. Then the alien commander scoffed. You'd advise me, she repeated, as if testing the words on her tongue, amusing. Tell me, Captain, what exactly do you think is going to happen here? Your ship is an insult to warfare. It barely holds itself together. Your weapons are outdated, your defenses non-existent. You are outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. What do you think you can possibly do? He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he gave a slow, deliberate nod to his engineer. Across the bridge, the man grinned and pressed his hand against the old flickering console. With a single push, the switch was thrown, and the ship woke up. The change was instant. The engines, which had been humming at a low whisper, surged to life with a sound that should not have been possible in the vacuum of space, deep, resonant, a thunderous growl that sent tremors through the hull. The ship trembled for a moment, then steadied. The power readings on the bridge displays spiked so violently that for a brief moment the numbers became unreadable. On the Solari ship, alarms blared across their pristine bridge, their scans flashing red with energy spikes that should not have existed. The alien commander's smug expression faltered as she turned to her officers, her voice sharp. What is happening? Report now. Her tactical officer's fingers flew across the controls, his normally smooth green skin paling. Commander, the human ship is increasing power. Its energy output is rising exponentially. This should not be possible. Lazara's eyes narrowed, her tail flicking in agitation. What kind of trick is this? She snapped. But before she could demand further answers, her screen flashed. The rusted human ship, once drifting lifeless, now pulsed with raw power, and then it moved. One moment it was there before them, a stationary target. The next it was a blur of motion. The ship surged forward at a speed that defied all logic, defied all physics. The Solari crew barely had time to react before the first blast tore through their formation. The human vessel twisted through space with impossible agility, its rusted hull nothing more than a deceptive shell hiding something monstrous within. Railguns fired in rapid succession, their slugs piercing through Solari shielding as if they were paper. Explosions rippled through the enemy fleet, bright bursts of fire illuminating the dark void. The Solari ships scrambled to reposition, but it was too late. The wreck they had mocked had turned into a predator, and it was hunting them down. On the human bridge, the crew remained focused, eyes locked on their displays, their movements precise, calculated. They had planned for this moment for years. The universe had written humanity off, had seen them as weak, had laughed at their outdated technology, and now they would learn what it meant to underestimate the species that refused to die. The human captain watched the chaos unfold on his screens, his face unreadable as his ship weaved through the Solari fleet, untouched, unrelenting. He reached forward, tapping a control on his armrest, his voice once again breaking through the comms, a quiet warning laced with something far colder than mockery. You should have stepped aside. The alien commander stood frozen, her ridged brow furrowed as her golden eyes darted between the flashing red alerts on her control panel. and the view screen where the human ship moved like a force of nature, the rusted vessel that she had mocked just moments ago was now tearing through her fleet like a blade through silk. Her tactical officer was shouting energy readings off the charts. The weapons officer was scrambling to recalibrate their targeting systems, but nothing was working. The human ship was too fast, too unpredictable. Impossible. Lizara snarled her claws, digging into the armrest of her command chair. This ship should not be capable of this. Find out what they're using. What kind of technology is powering that thing? Her officers scrambled, running scans, analyzing readings. But every answer they found only deepened their confusion. Commander, the ship is emitting energy signatures we've never seen before, but its hull, its weapons, its core systems, they all still read as outdated, primitive. This makes no sense. Lizara hissed, her mind racing. Every lesson she had ever learned about human technology, about their capabilities, was being shattered in real time. She had studied their history, their wars, their rise and fall across the stars. Humanity was supposed to be resourceful, yes, but not like this, not capable of overwhelming an imperial war fleet with a single ship. Her arrogance had led her here. Her assumption that their rusted vessel was a relic now, it was a nightmare. The bridge shuddered violently as another explosion erupted outside. On the screen, a Solari destroyer split apart, its core detonating in a brilliant flash of fire and debris. The human ship twisted through the wreckage, untouched, weaving through the chaos with a grace that no vessel of its size should have. Lizara grit her teeth, her tail lashing behind her as she turned to her weapons officer. Fire everything. I want that ship erased from existence. The Xelari fleet unleashed a storm of plasma fire missiles, streaked through the void. Energy cannons rolled. The space between the two forces became a battlefield of light and destruction. But the human ship did not falter. It did not even slow. Its thrusters flared with a pulse that sent shockwaves through the void, and then it vanished. Gasps echoed across the Solari bridge as their targeting systems lost track of the human vessel. Lizara's eyes darted across the display sensors, straining to find where it had gone. Commander, it's behind us, her navigation officer shouted just as a railgun round ripped through the rear shields of their warship. The impact sent the Solari bridge crew stumbling. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, consoles flickered and failed. Lizara slammed her fist against the armrest of her chair, rage bubbling beneath her skin. She had been played. She had been outmaneuvered by a species she had considered beneath her. Her sharp teeth clenched as she forced herself to think, forced herself to understand what was happening. The rust, the patchwork hull, the weak energy readings. It was all a lie. The humans had tricked them. They had presented themselves as weak, as outdated, as inferior, so that the Xelari would lower their guard. They had used their arrogance against them, and now they were paying the price. Lizara took a slow, deep breath, steadying herself. She would not fall here. She would not allow her empire's finest fleet to be reduced to wreckage by a single ship. She turned sharply to her tactical officer. I want every remaining ship to focus fire on that vessel. It does not matter how fast it is. If we turn this battlefield into a wall of energy, they will not escape. And prepare to send a distress signal. We need reinforcements now. But before the order could be carried out, the view screen flickered, and then the human captain's face appeared once more, his expression unreadable, his eyes sharp and unwavering. You don't need reinforcements, Commander, he said, his voice calm, almost casual. You need to surrender. A cold fury burned through Lizara's chest. She refused to be humiliated, refused to let a single human dictate the terms of this battle. She leaned forward, her claws digging into the console. You think you have already won, she growled. The human's expression did not change, but there was something behind his eyes, something dangerous. You already lost, he said quietly, you just haven't realized it yet. And then the human ship's engines rolled once more, a deafening thunder that sent another tremor through the void, and the battle was far from over. The Solari warship trembled under the relentless assault of the human vessel. Every impact sent shockwaves through the bridge consoles, flickered warning sirens. Blade crew members struggled to keep their balance as another railgun round ripped through their aft. Shielding the human ship was everywhere, and nowhere moving too fast, hitting too hard. Its engines howled with a deep reverberation that seemed to shake the very fabric of space. The Zellari fleet was in chaos, their formations shattered, their defenses failing, their once overwhelming numbers now nothing more than scattered wreckage floating in the void. Commander Lizara gritted her teeth, her claws digging into the armrest of her command chair. Her golden eyes burned with frustration, but beneath it was something else, something she refused to acknowledge, a creeping thread of fear. She had never seen anything like this. She had fought countless battles, crushed weaker civilizations under the might of the Zellari Empire, but this was different, this was wrong. She turned sharply to her weapons officer. Fire everything, focus all cannons on her engines. It cannot be allowed to keep moving. The officer obeyed. Immediately, his fingers flying across the controls, the Zellari warship unleashed a barrage of plasma cannons, missiles, and energy blasts, a wall of destruction designed to consume anything caught in its path. The weapons burned through space, streaks of molten energy tearing towards the rusted human vessel, and then in an instant it was gone. Gasps echoed through the Zellari bridge as their targeting systems failed to lock onto anything. The human ship had simply vanished before impact. Sensors scrambled, searching for any trace of its location. Impossibly, it had already repositioned behind them. Before Lizara could react, another impact rocked the ship. The bridge lights flickered, an explosion erupted somewhere below decks, sending a violent tremor through the hull. Commander, our engine stabilizers are failing, shouted the tactical officer. Damage reports fluttered across the control panels. Critical systems failing, power fluctuating, shields barely holding together. The human ship was dismantling them piece by piece. The screen flickered again, and the human captain's face reappeared, his expression calm, his posture relaxed, as if he were having a casual conversation rather than commanding a ship in battle. His eyes locked onto Lizara, and she felt something cold settle in her chest. "You don't understand what you're up against," he said quietly, his voice carrying no arrogance, no mockery, only certainty. "Your empire, your ships, your weapons, they were built on the belief that you are superior, that no one can challenge you, that your technology is unmatched. But you never considered that someone might adapt faster than you, someone might fight harder than you, someone might learn how to turn your own arrogance against you." Lizara hissed, her hands curled into fists. "You think your single ship can break an empire?" she spat. The human captain leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Breaking your empire was never the plan. Teaching you a lesson that you'll never forget was." And then the human ship's engines ignited once more, the deep, thunderous roar that had haunted the Zellari fleet from the moment the battle began. But this time something was different. The energy readings spiked beyond anything that Zellari had ever recorded, a surge so powerful their sensors overloaded. For a brief moment, everything went dark. Then the human ship moved. It blurred across the battlefield, a streak of impossible speed weaving through the remaining Zellari warships. Before they could react, their systems scrambled, their targeting arrays failing one by one, their engines failing, their weapons silenced. The ship they had mocked for its rusted hull, for its archaic technology, had torn through them with a precision that defied all logic. One by one, the Zellari ships fell, powerless, crippled, helpless. On the bridge of the Zellari warship, Lizara's breathing was heavy, her fists clenched so tightly her claws nearly pierced her own palms. She had never felt this before, never in her life. Defeat, true, undeniable, absolute defeat. She could see it on the faces of her crew, the way their eyes darted between their failing systems and the human ship that now loomed before them, the way their hands trembled over the controls, as if waiting for her to say something, to give an order that could still turn this battle around. But there was no such order, there was no way out. The screen flickered again, the human captain watching her with the same unreadable expression, his voice as steady as ever. "Surrender while you still have a fleet left, Commander." Her throat tightened, her pride screamed at her to fight, to refuse to bow to a human. But her logic knew better. The battle was already over. She had simply been too blind to see it. Commander Lizara stood rigid, her claws still gripping the armrests of her chair. The bridge around her was a mess. Smoke filled the air consoles, flickered sparks rained down from ruptured panels, and her crew, though trained, hardened elite warriors of the Zellari Empire, sat frozen in place, staring at the screen where the human captain watched them, his expression unreadable. His voice had been calm, not gloating, not mocking, simply stating a fact: "Surrender while you still have a fleet left, Commander." Her throat burned with unspoken fury. The words clawed at her pride, demanding to be rejected. Surrender was not an option. Solari did not surrender. They crushed, they dominated, they ruled. Yet here, she was her finest warship, crippled, her fleet broken by a single human vessel, a ship that by all logic should not have been able to do this. Her mind raced, scanning for options. But the truth was brutal, undeniable. They had nothing left. Their weapons could not lock onto the human ship. Their engines were barely holding together, and their reinforcements would not arrive in time. If she fought now, it would not be a battle, it would be a slaughter. She forced her claws to release the chair, her hands trembling just slightly. She turned to her tactical officer, his face pale, his usually sharp green eyes clouded with uncertainty. She saw it in him, in all of them, the realization, the fear. "Commander," he began hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. We can't win this." She wanted to snap at him, to snarl at them all for their weakness. But she knew it was not weakness, it was reality. The human captain remained silent, watching her, waiting. He was giving her a choice, an illusion of control. He could have destroyed them by now. But he had not. Why let her make the decision? Why not simply finish it? The answer was clear. Because this was not about winning, this was about sending a message. Her fists clenched. She wanted to scream, wanted to curse the arrogance of the humans. But deep down she knew this was not arrogance, it was strategy. Her tail flicked in agitation, her breathing heavy. Then finally, after a long agonizing moment, she exhaled a slow, sharp breath and gave the order: stand down, power down weapons, all ships surrender. Her own voice felt foreign in her throat. Her bridge fell silent, the tension thick, heavy. No one moved, no one spoke. Then one by one the remaining Solari ships followed the order. Their weapons went dark, their thrusters dimmed. The battle was over. The human captain nodded once, his face unchanged. But there was something in his eyes, something deeper than victory, regret, maybe understanding, or perhaps just calculation. "You made the right call, Commander," he said, his voice still level. Her jaw tightened. She hated him, she hated everything about this moment. But she knew she had no choice. "You will take prisoners?" she asked, her voice laced with bitterness. "Or will you destroy us now?" The captain exhaled, shaking his head. "We were never here to kill you," he said. "Simply you assumed we were weak, you assumed we were relics, you assumed you had already won before the battle even started. And because of that you lost today. It's not about prisoners today, it's about something far more important today. It's about making sure that the Solari Empire never makes that mistake again." His words struck harder than any weapon, harder than any explosion, because she knew they were true. She had underestimated them. She had been so sure of her own superiority that she had never even considered the possibility that the humans had adapted, that they had learned how to turn their own weaknesses into strengths. The human ship slowly pulled back, its engines humming like a beast returning to its den. It did not gloat, it did not linger. The Solari fleet had been broken not just physically but psychologically. As the screen went dark, leaving only the wreckage of what had once been her fleet, Lazara sat back in her chair, her claws gripping the armrests once more, but this time not with anger, with understanding, because deep down she knew this defeat was not just hers. It was the beginning of something far greater, something the Solari Empire would never forget. The silence on the Solari bridge was suffocating. The once pristine control panels now flickered with damaged readouts, their once flawless warship reduced to a smoldering wreck, drifting in the void. Her crew sat frozen, their expressions blank, their rigid discipline shattered by the sheer impossibility of what had just happened. Lizara could still hear the echoes of the human captain's final words in her mind, not gloating, not mocking, just calm, unwavering, undeniable. Today is about making sure that Solari Empire never makes that mistake again. Her claws tapped against the armrest slowly, methodically. She had surrendered, she had given the order with her own voice, and now the weight of it pressed against her chest, heavier than anything she had ever felt before. She had always believed in the Empire's strength, in its destiny to rule the stars, and yet today that belief had cracked. She turned her gaze to the main screen where the human vessel still lingered in the distance, not moving, not pressing the attack, just waiting, watching, as if ensuring that the lesson had been fully absorbed. She wanted to hate them. She wanted to curse their names, swear vengeance, promise that the Solari Empire would return stronger. But she could not bring herself to speak the words, because deep down beneath the anger, beneath the humiliation, something else was stirring, something dangerous, something she did not want to acknowledge. Respect. The human ship had been a deception from the start, its rusted hull, its outdated readings, a carefully crafted illusion. They had played the Solari Empire's arrogance against them perfectly, and they had won because of it, not with superior firepower, not with overwhelming force, but with strategy, with patience, with an understanding of that enemy so complete it had unraveled centuries of Solari dominance in a single battle. She inhaled slowly, forcing her body to remain still even as her mind raced. Her tactical officer cleared his throat hesitantly, his voice uncertain. "Commander, what are your orders?" Her golden eyes flicked toward him, seeing the uncertainty, the shaken belief in his face. She glanced around at the others, the officers, the bridge crew. They were all watching her, waiting for some kind of direction, something to tell them what came next, because everything they had believed about the humans had just been shattered. She leaned forward slowly, her voice quiet but firm. "Send word to the High Council, tell them what happened." Her communications officer hesitated for only a moment before nodding, turning to his console, beginning to transmit the message to the Empire back home on Solari Prime. The ruling council would hear of this battle. They would hear of the impossible victory the humans had claimed. They would hear of the ship that had defied logic, of the engines that had rolled like a thunderstorm, of the captain who had torn apart an Imperial fleet without so much as a scratch. They would not be pleased. Lazara knew what was coming. She knew how the council would react. Their arrogance would not allow them to accept this defeat easily. They would demand retaliation. They would seek to crush the humans in overwhelming force. But she also knew something else, something that sent a chill through her spine. If they underestimated the humans again, if they failed to learn from this mistake, the next time they faced them, there might not be a chance to surrender. Her gaze drifted back to the screen where the human ship had begun to move, its engines flaring to life. But this time they were not roaring with power, not shaking the void with their presence. This time they were quiet, restrained, a predator that had already made its point and was now retreating into the darkness. They could have destroyed us, she thought, her hands tightening into fists. They had the power, they had the opportunity, but they chose not to. Why? The answer was clear. Because they did not need to, because they understood something the Solari Empire did not, because for all the supposed superiority, but Solari had been outmatched not by strength, but by something far more dangerous. Ingenuity. She exhaled a slow, controlled breath as the human ship disappeared from view, her heart still pounding in her chest. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to fear something, not because of its power, but because of what it represented: change. And she did not know whether the Solari Empire was ready for it. The transmission to the High Council had been sent. The message now raced across the vast expanse of space towards Solari Prime, where the rulers of the Empire would receive it, dissect it, and react as they always did, with fury and denial. Commander, Lazara knew this. She could already hear their voices in her mind, demanding explanations, demanding retribution, demanding that the humiliation of this battle be erased with fire and war. But she also knew something they did not, something they would not understand until it was too late. The humans were not to be underestimated ever again. She stood from her chair, slowly ignoring the dull ache in her muscles. Her golden eyes scanned the faces of her bridge crew. They were still in shock, their bodies still tense, their minds struggling to process the weight of what had just happened. Warriors who had trained for decades, believing in the absolute supremacy of the Solari fleet, now forced to face a reality they had never prepared for. The rusted human ship had vanished into the void, but its presence lingered like a shadow. Its engines had not just rolled through space, they had rolled through the hearts and minds of every Solari who had witnessed them, a sound that would never be forgotten. Commander, one of her officers, finally spoke, breaking the silence, his voice hesitant, uncertain. "What do we do now?" She exhaled slowly. The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. There were protocols for battle losses, there were strategies in place for regrouping, for reinforcing, for striking back, but none of them applied to this, because this was not just a loss, it was something far worse. It was a lesson, and it had been delivered with surgical precision. "We return to Solari Prime," she said finally, her voice even unreadable, "and we wait for the Council's orders." The words felt hollow, because she already knew what the council would say. They would demand retaliation, they would mobilize the fleet, they would send an armada to crush the humans beneath their might. But Lizara had seen what the humans were capable of. She had witnessed the truth with her own eyes, and she knew with a terrible certainty that if the council repeated the same mistake, they would not be facing just one human ship next time. They would be facing an entire species that had learned how to turn weakness into strength, that had learned how to outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight an empire that had ruled the stars for centuries. The humans would be waiting. She turned to her navigation officer, plot a course back to the homeworld, informed the remaining fleet to follow at once. She commanded, her voice cold, controlled, as if the weight of her own thoughts did not press against her with every breath, as if she did not feel the shifting tide of history itself moving beneath her feet. The officer nodded quickly, and within moments the damaged Solari ships began to align themselves, engines flickering, as they prepared for the long journey home. The silence of the bridge was thick, suffocating. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. They had all felt it. They had all seen it. The Solari Empire had encountered something new, something dangerous, and for the first time in its long history, it had been forced to submit. As the ship's engines hummed to life and the battered fleet began to pull away from the wreckage of the battlefield, Lizara allowed herself a final glance at the empty space where the human vessel had vanished. A shiver ran down her spine. They had let the Xilari live, they had let them escape, but not out of mercy, out of strategy, because now the Xilari would carry this defeat back to their own empire, like a disease infecting every ruler, every general, every soldier with the truth. Humanity was not weak, humanity was not broken, humanity was something else, something that had evolved in the shadows, something that had learned how to turn rust into thunder. The High Council would not understand at first, they would not believe until it was too late, and when the time came, when the humans returned, when their ships no longer hid beneath rusted deception, when their engines roared once more, Lizara wondered if the Empire would survive long enough to regret what it had failed to see before it was too late. The journey back to Xilari Prime was long and silent. The fleet, battered, broken, humiliated, drifted through the void like wounded beasts. Every ship bore the scars of the battle, each dented hull, each scorched panel, a testament to a lesson learned too late. Lizara sat in her command chair, staring at the endless stretch of space beyond the view screen, her golden eyes unreadable, her thoughts tangled in the weight of what had transpired. She had sent the report to the High Council, detailed, precise, unflinching. She had not softened the truth, nor had she allowed her pride to twist the facts. The Xilari fleet had been defeated utterly and completely by a single human ship, a vessel that by all appearances should have been a relic, and yet had torn through them with the precision of a predator among prey. The message had been acknowledged, but no response had come yet. She knew what they would say, she knew what they would demand: retaliation. Her claws tapped idly against the armrest of her chair, a slow rhythmic sound. Her mind replayed the battle, every movement, every mistake, every calculated strike from the humans. They had planned this from the beginning. They had known exactly how the Xilari would react. They had baited them into arrogance, and then struck with terrifying efficiency. And then when they had won, when they could have wiped the fleet from existence, they had chosen to let them live. Why, the question gnawed at her. The humans had nothing to gain by letting them go, unless they knew that this battle was not the end, unless they knew that the real war was only beginning. The bridge was quiet, the crew moving with the stiffness of those who had faced the impossible and survived, but they were not victorious. They were not returning home as heroes, they were returning as a warning. Commander Lizara, the communications officer's voice, broke the silence. A High Council is demanding an immediate audience. They want you to report directly upon arrival. She exhaled slowly. Of course, they did. They would want explanations, they would want reassurances, they would want a plan for vengeance. Very well, she said evenly, inform them that we will comply. As the fleet continued its slow journey home, she leaned back in her chair, her mind turning over every possible scenario. She had no doubt that the council would call for war. They would gather their fleets, they would sharpen their claws, they would seek to erase this humiliation with overwhelming force, but they would be making the same mistake again. They would assume that human strength lay in their weapons, in their ships, in their technology. They would think that brute force was enough to crush them. But Lazara had seen the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was its mind. They adapted, they learned, they turned weakness into strength, and if the Zilari Empire went to war with them, believing they could win with sheer numbers alone, then it would not be humanity that was erased from the stars. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, gathering herself. There was only one path forward. She would have to make them see, she would have to make them understand. Because if the Empire marched into this war blind, then they would not be marching toward victory. They would be marching toward extinction. The ship shuddered as it entered the final approach to Zilari Prime, the homeworld looming ahead, a planet of sprawling cities, towering spires, and endless fleets, the heart of the Empire, strong, proud, unshaken. But for how much longer? The bridge crews straightened as they neared the docking station, tension running through them like an unspoken current. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she would carry herself, waiting to see if their commander still believed in the Empire's supremacy, or if the battle had changed her. She did not give them an answer, not yet. As the docking clamps engaged and the ship settled into place, Lazara rose to her feet, her expression unreadable, her tail flicking. Once behind her, she'd have faced death on the battlefield. Now, she would face something far more dangerous. The High Council of the Zilari Empire. And she was not sure which enemy was more terrifying. The halls of the Imperial Citadel were as vast and imposing as ever, towering pillars of obsidian and gold stretched high above Lazara's head. The air was thick, with the scent of burning incense, the symbol of tradition, the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. But she barely noticed her steps were measured, her expression unreadable. As she walked toward the council chamber, every eye was on her, the whispers of the courtiers, the glances of military officers, the unreadable stares of the palace guards. All of them knew why she was here, all of them knew what had happened. The doors to the council chamber loomed ahead, massive, adorned with the insignia of the Empire. 2 guards flanked the entrance, their armor gleaming, their weapons at their sides. They gave her a single sharp nod before stepping aside, allowing the doors to part with a deep mechanical groan, revealing the chamber beyond. Inside, the High Council sat on their thrones, a semicircle of towering seats, each occupied by the most powerful rulers of the Zilari Empire. Their robes of deep crimson shimmered under the chamber's cold artificial light, their eyes sharp, their expressions unreadable, except for the Emperor himself, seated at the highest throne, his gaze locked onto her, the weight of his presence like a blade at her throat. Commander Lazara, the Emperor's voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, something dangerous. You have returned. Tell us why you stand before us without victory. Tell us why you have failed. She did not flinch, did not bow, did not let the weight of his words press her down. She stood straight, her tail flicking, once behind her, then still. Because we underestimated them, she said plainly, because the humans are not what we believe them to be. The murmurs rippled through the chamber, the council members exchanging glances. A few narrowed their eyes, others scoffed, as if refusing to acknowledge the truth before them. The Emperor's expression did not change. Explain. She exhaled slowly, then began recounting the battle in exacting detail, every movement, every tactic, every decision. She did not spare herself. She did not soften the truth. She told them how the human ship had outmaneuvered them, how it had exploited their arrogance, how it had delivered not just a military defeat, but a psychological one, how it had let them live not out of mercy, but out of strategy. When she finished, silence hung in the air like a blade waiting to drop. Then one of the council members, a warlord with deep scars along his face, leaned forward, his eyes burning with fury. Do you expect us to believe that a single human vessel destroyed an entire Zilari fleet with ease, that they allowed you to retreat, that they humiliated the Empire and simply let you go? Yes, she said without hesitation. The council erupted in noise, voices overlapping, some calling for retaliation, others calling for punishment, some outright dismissing her words as an excuse for failure. She let them argue, she let their arrogance fester, because she knew it would not last. Enough. The Emperor's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, and the chamber fell silent once more, his golden eyes locked onto hers. And you believe that if we launch an invasion, we will lose? If we go to war as we are now, yes, she said firmly, we will be fighting an enemy that learns, that adapts, that turns weakness into strength. If we go to war, believing that sheer force will win, we will lose everything. Another silence, a longer one this time. Then the Emperor leaned forward, his gaze unreadable. "Then tell us, Commander, what do you propose?" Her claws dug into her palms. This was at the moment where she either saved the Empire or sealed its fate. She took a slow breath. "We do not fight them as conquerors," she said. "We do not fight them as we have fought lesser species before. We fight them as equals. We study them as they have studied us. We adapt as they have adapted. If we are to win this war, we must become more than what we are." The words hung in the air, heavy, unspoken truths, shifting in the minds of those who listened. For the first time in Solari history, they faced something they could not simply crush, and now they had to decide. Evolve or die. The Emperor studied her long and hard. Then finally he leaned back, his eyes still burning with thought. "The Zalari Empire does not kneel," he said slowly, "but perhaps it is time we learn to stand in a different way." And Lizara knew that the real war had just begun.